Well, the news that just broke has absolutely shaken the world. In what can only be described as a stunning overnight raid, U.S. Special Forces have captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro right from his palace in Caracas. I mean, this is a completely unprecedented event. So we're going to break it all down. How this happened, why the White House says they did it, and the big question, what does this all mean for the future of Venezuela? You know, President Trump's own words really set the scene for this whole thing. He said it was dark and it was deadly. That tells you right away this wasn't just some political maneuver. No, this was a full-blown, high-stakes military operation, and the details are just now starting to come to light. So let's start with the raid itself, which U.S. officials apparently called Operation Absolute Resolve. And believe me, the tactical details behind this are pretty incredible. First off, the sheer scale of this was just massive. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has confirmed that over 150 aircraft were involved here, and they were launched from all across the Western Hemisphere. We're not talking about a small in-and-out job. This was F-22s, F-35s, B-1 bombers, and a whole swarm of drones providing air cover for the entire mission. Just a huge show of force. And it was over in a flash. The entire assault on Maduro's compound, which is heavily fortified and right in the middle of Caracas, took less than 30 minutes. Think about that. U.S. forces hit the ground at 1:01 a.m. and were wheels up by 3:29 a.m. The whole plan was built on speed and the element of total surprise. So after they captured him, Maduro was taken on this incredibly complex 2,100-mile journey. First, they whisked him away by helicopter to a U.S. warship out in the Caribbean. From there, it was on to Guantanamo Bay, and then, finally, he was flown to New York, where he's going to face federal charges. It was this massive logistical puzzle, all designed to get a head of state completely out of his country and away from any of his allies. And you just don't pull something like this off without an insane amount of preparation. The Pentagon's top general actually revealed that his forces rehearsed this for months, studying Maduro's every move. And get this, they even built a full-scale replica of his compound just to make sure, in his words, they could not get it wrong. Incredible. Okay. So a raid this audacious, this unprecedented, it just raises a giant question. Why? Why do this at all? Let's dig into what the White House is officially saying, what their justification is for an action that really has no modern parallel. Speaking from Mar-a-Lago, President Trump made a statement that is just absolutely stunning. He said this wasn't just about grabbing a wanted man. He declared that the U.S. intends to directly govern Venezuela, at least for a while. That is a massive statement of intent. So the White House laid out a few key objectives. Officially, the whole mission was framed as a strike against narco-terrorism, all to protect Americans. But right alongside bringing Maduro to justice, President Trump also flat out mentioned getting Venezuela's oil flowing again, which, reveals a pretty powerful economic angle to all this. But look, with claims this big, you have to ask, do they actually hold up to scrutiny? So let's do that. Let's put the administration's justifications up against the available evidence and see what we find. This was probably one of the most explosive claims the president made. He directly linked Maduro to sending a notoriously violent Venezuelan gang, the Tren de Aragua, into the United States. I mean, he's painting a picture of a direct, state-sponsored threat happening right on American soil. But here's the thing. A recent report from the U.S. National Intelligence Council, we're talking America's own intelligence community here, paints a very different picture. It concludes that, yeah, the chaos in Venezuela definitely helps the gang, but the regime itself probably isn't directing their movements into the U.S., so there's a direct contradiction there. And this isn't actually the first time the administration's numbers have been called into question. When justifying strikes against drug boats, the president claimed each one saved 25,000 lives, while the fact-checking group PolitiFact rated that claim pants on fire. They pointed out that if you do the math, it would mean 800,000 lives saved, which is almost 11 times the total number of people who die from overdoses in the U.S. each year. The numbers just don't add up. So, putting aside the public justifications for a second, there is a very real, formal legal case being built. Let's take a look at the actual charges and some of the really unusual historical and legal precedents for putting a captured head of state on trial. The indictment, which the Justice Department just unsealed, is pretty damning. It charges Maduro and his whole inner circle in New York with running a decades-long conspiracy to flood the United States with cocaine. This is what they mean by narco-terrorism, using the drug trade to fund and arm terrorist groups. These are incredibly serious charges. And check this out. The timing of the raid is fascinating. Maduro was captured on January 3rd.
That is the exact same date, 36 years to the day, that the Panamanian strongman Manuel Noriega surrendered to U.S. forces after they invaded. The parallel is, well, it's so striking, it's almost certainly not a coincidence.
Now, this all brings up a really important legal question. How can the U.S. even try a leader it seized from a foreign country? Well, the answer lies in this controversial legal idea called the Curve-Frisbee doctrine. And what it basically says is that it doesn't matter how a defendant ends up in the U.S. courtroom. Even if they were illegally abducted, the trial itself can still go forward. So with Maduro captured and in U.S. custody, the most critical question of all is still out there. What happens to Venezuela now? The raid might be over, but the future for that country is just deeply, deeply uncertain. You know, history offers some pretty sobering lessons here. The U.S. has a very, very mixed record, and that's putting it lightly when it comes to these kinds of regime change operations. I mean, from Iran and Vietnam to more recent interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, these actions very often lead to decades of instability and all sorts of unintended consequences. And there's a huge practical problem right from the start. The U.S. closed its embassy in Caracas all the way back in 2019. That means there is virtually zero American diplomatic capacity on the ground, which makes the idea of running the country, as Trump put it, an absolutely immense challenge from day one. This whole operation is also creating some deep fractures, even within Trump's own political base. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a really staunch ally, said something a lot of people in the MAGA movement are probably thinking. She basically said they thought they were voting to end foreign wars, not to start new ones. And so, at the end of the day, we're left with this fundamental question. Is the capture of Nicolás Maduro some bold new chapter in American foreign policy, a new way of doing things? Or is this the beginning of a repeat of some of its most costly mistakes? Right now, absolutely no one knows the answer.